Everyone, we'll continue memorizing from the book of Hebrews. So we memorized up to verse 4 in chapter 3. So today we are going to memorize verse 5. So I'll read that first. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. So I'll read that again. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. So, Hebrews chapter 3, verse 1 to 6, the author is comparing Moses with Jesus and proving the superiority of Jesus. So, I'll read chapter 3, verse 1 to 6, so you will have the complete context, and we'll meditate more on verse 5. Therefore, holy brethren, who share in a heavenly call, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. He was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses also was faithful in God's house. Yet Jesus has been counted worthy of as much more glory than Moses, as the builder of a house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house if we hold fast to our confidence and pride in our confidence and pride in our hope. So that is Hebrews chapter 3 verse 1 to 6. So here we compared the ministry of Moses and Jesus. We saw many parallels between their ministry, and we also saw that Moses was faithful in his ministry. He was faithful to the ministry that God has entrusted to him. Jesus also was faithful to his ministry. He was faithful as a son, but here we see Moses was faithful as a servant, but Jesus was faithful as a son. So we saw that God had given a very unique ministry or singular ministry to Moses. So he entrusted his people, his chosen people, to Moses, and he was very faithful in doing that job. And God has rejected all who tried to become equal to Moses. He rejected all of them. So we saw many people rebelled against Moses, and they all perished. Even Moses' brother and sister, when they spoke against them, God punished them. We read that in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses, and God was punishing them. So God entrusted his house to Moses, and he was very faithful in that role. He was 100% faithful in that. Same way, Jesus was also faithful to his Father. He was not seeking his own glory. He was seeking the glory of his Father. He was obedient to his Father. He submitted to his Father's will. Through his obedience, he obtained salvation for mankind. So we saw all the parallels between both the ministry. And in the Old Testament time, Moses gave the law. He was the transmitter of the law, but in the New Testament time, Jesus gave the law. But Jesus is God himself. He is equal to Father. He is the second person of the Trinity. He is the Son of the Father. He is consubstantial with the Father. So he has more honor than Moses. Moses is a servant. He is we see that the Jewish people held Moses in very high esteem. So here the author is very carefully comparing Moses with Jesus. So yesterday we saw that yesterday and day before we meditated that he is comparing, he is using the simile of a building and proving that Jesus is superior to Moses. Here what we read yesterday is, yet Jesus has been counted worthy of as much more glory than Moses, as the builder of a house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. So God is the builder of all things. So Jesus is the builder of all things. He has created everything. Everything was created through him, by him, and for him. And he is the creator of everything. He is the builder of the house. He has more. So using that simile, the author proved that Jesus has more glory than Moses. And here in this verse, he is using the simile of a family. So in a family, the son has more honor than the master or than the servant of the house, right? So using the family or using the family, again he is proving the supremacy of Jesus. He is the son, so son has more honor than the servant of the house. So that's what we see here. Now Moses was faithful in God's house as a servant. He is a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. So he is the foremost prophet, right? So here in the book of Luke, we see that Jesus is explaining to the disciples who were walking to Emmaus, "O foolish men and slow of heart to believe all that prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself," right? So he was the foremost prophet who spoke about Jesus and spoke about God's salvation plan, right? So here we see now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. So he was faithful as a servant. So using the simile of a family, he is proving the superiority of Jesus. So he's saying son has more honor than a servant. So Jesus is superior to Moses, right? So I'll read that again, 5 and 6 together. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house if we hold fast our confidence and pride in our hope. So this is a beautiful passage that compares the Old Testament ministry with the New Testament ministry, or compares Moses with Jesus. So it's a very beautiful explanation of that. So it's a very beautiful passage. So try to memorize it now itself. So this is a small verse, right? You can memorize it today itself. Hebrews chapter 3 verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. Thank you. God bless you all.